We're glad you're here, and we're about to begin. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. KenCast After Dark. Stimulating conversations all night long. And here's your host, Ken Cole.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you for another KenCast After Dark. I hope your week is going well. And I hope now you're able to relax into a nice, gentle evening free of stress and waiting for your mind to be stimulated by wonderful conversation. Today, guys, we have something I think very interesting. I know a lot of you are movie fans out there, and you may have seen the news lately about a site called RottenTomatoes.com. You may visit this site frequently. You may use this site to help decide what movies and TV shows are worth watching, what's good, what's not good. However, we've had some exposés where this site actually may not be very reliable and actually might be gaming the entire movie system or vice versa. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at all of this. We're going to figure out whether Rotten Tomatoes is lying to us, which it might be. And we're going to use our brains and analysis to figure out what the truth is. I want to hear your comments, whether you're watching live in the chat or on replay. Go ahead and leave a comment below the video. It's wonderful to have you here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am very honored to welcome a special guest tonight. You've seen him before. He is the co-host of the Last Row podcast. It's my pleasure to introduce Drew Rohaly. Drew, how are you tonight?
Doing great, Ken. I'm always excited to be on the KenCast, especially after dark, for all of the stimulating conversation here, and especially this topic. This one's near and dear to my heart, so I'm excited about this one. Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely, Drew. And you know, before we get into this, I want people to understand your background with the Last Row podcast. And if people haven't listened to this podcast before, they need to go listen to it. But I wanted to bring this up because you guys do movies all the time. Can you tell us a little bit about the Last Row podcast?
Yeah, we're a movie podcast. It's every other Thursday we release new episodes. This past Thursday we released the second to last movie in our summer of sequels, Child's Play 2. So right now we're doing a bunch of sequels to movies that we've done before. We have RoboCop 2 coming up next Thursday. But we primarily shade towards nostalgic movies. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so you know, we tend to do a lot of stuff that you would say is rewatchable or things that you haven't watched in a while or things that you watched a lot growing up. We try to break them down in a fun way. We break down weird plot points and talk a little bit about, the things that maybe it's not necessarily a review per se, just more breaking down the movie world. But, check us out, thelastrowpodcast.com. And hopefully we've had some movies that you guys have all seen and watched and liked. We have a pretty extensive back catalog. I think we're up to 138 episodes now. So there's probably something that you'll like in there. Thank you.
Yes, and I know a lot of people watching this channel are fans, say, of the, can we say it during the strike? I don't know, why not? The Karate Kid universe. Yes. The Ballad of Terry Silver remains just a quintessential episode. You guys have to listen to that. They did the first expose analysis of that character on the internet, and it's absolutely fascinating. So everyone check that out. I've got a link in the description, and if you feel so inclined, give them a 5-star review because they deserve it.
Thank you.
I want to take a minute, Drew, and say hi to everyone who's joining us tonight. AEH, wonderful to see you. Robana, thank you for being a channel member. 80s Nostalgia, thanks for joining us from Taiwan. Drew, look at this.
Yes.
all across the world. Darkest Hour, hey all, nice surprise having a show tonight. I know, yeah, I thought it might be a fun night. Drew, thanks for joining us on a Wednesday. Jorge says, save silver. Yes, save silver.
I like your avatar, Jorge.
Superman. I love it. We will be talking about comic book movies tonight, so definitely stick around. 80s Nostalgia, great to see you. Clifford, thanks for being a channel member, Clifford. Santino, Terry's behind this, I know it. He might be, Drew. We'll have to talk about that possibility that he's actually the one running Rotten Tomatoes. We shall see. He also says, hello, Drew.
Hello, Clifford.
And Darkest Hour says, what's up, Drew?
Hello.
Robana says, hello, Drew. We've got Cobra Kai Wisdom here tonight. Great to see you, Mike. Oh my gosh, wonderful to see you. South Texas, Jorge, thanks for joining us. 420. Hello, everyone.
Showing the love tonight.
Yes. Peter Vonasak, who's lying? Oh, Peter, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love this. So, let's speaking of lying, Drew, let's talk about this. Let's start to get revved up for a minute, because you and the Last Row podcast review all or discuss all kinds of movies, and as part of that, you use this. You use Rotten Tomatoes as a
Yep.
metric, but you kind of communicated to me that you have feelings about Rotten Tomatoes. What are your feelings about Rotten Tomatoes?
Most of the time when we look at the score, it's either way too high or way too low. If you listen to our show, you know that that's something that we tend to say. I typically don't agree with it very often, and it's an interesting metric because my co-host Badway, he actually lobbied to get rid of Rotten Tomatoes on our show for many years, and for a while we actually erased it. We didn't use it because he just thought it was kind of a silly metric, which I can't disagree, right? Like, a number really does tend to impact something, and when you start to cater towards a score as to whether you wanna make a movie a certain way or not, it starts to dilute everything. It tends to, instead of going for what your vision may be, a studio may say, "Hey, well, we need a good Rotten Tomatoes score, so let's sort of make it safer." And it may water down maybe an artistic vision. That's where you like to see movies like an Oppenheimer or something like that, where they just go for it. Like, I love Christopher Nolan's style and stuff like that. But the score impacts a lot of people's opinion on whether they're gonna go see something or not. And the score itself is an aggregate of whether something is fresh or rotten, which is what, right? We're gonna break that down, but does it really mean something's good or bad? Some people do use it for that, and they say, "Oh, that movie stinks. It's got, 32%." I don't know.
Right.
Most movies that I like, I would argue, are less than 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I like a lot of those kind of movies.
Let me follow that up with this question. You look at all kinds of metrics. Do you find that there is one that's kind of more on target than Rotten Tomatoes?
I they all kinda have the same inherent problems in that it's sort of trying to find a way to put a number to something that's subjective, and
Mhm.
it is difficult. Like, if you look at maybe Metacritic is a little bit different. Like, I feel like Metacritic's maybe a bit more receptive and accurate towards how people feel. Because if you think about it, like, movie reviews could be X number out of 5, or, you could say it's X number out of 10. Like, if you look at IMDb.com, right? That's a 10 scale, and then some other, scales are 5. What Rotten Tomatoes does is it starts to put a fresh or a rotten based on a certain number there, and then it creates its own number based on that. So I feel like when you're looking at the individual scores, like an IMDb rating, or even Letterboxd is an interesting one. I know that that's user, community, but I find actually Letterboxd is an interesting one for me. You could see a review, it's out of 5, and there's half stars in there as well. But what's kind of nice about that is it's a good aggregate of different people out there. It's all users. There's certain film critics on there as well. But you can read the review and you can then look at the score, and then you can see the amount of votes. It starts to be a little bit more accurate to me, and then I can start to poke into, okay, do I want to dive a little deeper into this movie, learn a little bit more? Most of the time I'll watch it anyway, but I think like those I found are more representative of what I would think a movie score would be versus this yes or no, essentially, like a black and white binary.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to get into that, because that's not something that everyone realizes. It is very binary, and it's kind of weird how Rotten
yeah.
Tomatoes does that. So, we're going to get into things, Drew, and I think it's possible that the movie fans among us who are watching and listening might get a little riled up tonight. And I thought it might be an important moment to step back and center ourselves again. Okay, so for the first time on KenCast, on this KenCast After Dark, I want to take everyone through just a brief guided meditation. That's right. So everyone, unless you're driving, go ahead and relax. Okay. You're driving.
I'm going to close my eyes with you here.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Eyes closed. Good. Okay. Now let all the tension and stress go out of your body. And as you look into the void, you see a small twinkle of light It's approaching you. It's giving you a sense of happiness. As it gets closer, you can see it's a small, tiny tomato plant. And it's getting bigger. It's growing so fast. And look at those little tiny tomatoes. They're just growing right out of the plant, getting large. They're the biggest tomatoes you've ever seen. You're just surrounded by happiness. And those little green tomatoes, they just leap right off the plant. Now they're circling up in the air. They're surrounding your head. You look around, you're trying to take in this wondrous vision. With these green tomatoes, it's like they're attracted to your energy. They're surrounding you. And as you're basking in each other's energy, those green tomatoes are becoming red. They're becoming ripe. And they're getting excited, and you're getting excited. And those tomatoes are getting so excited that they explode. And all that tomato juice is flowing all over your head and your shoulders. And you feel content. And you know that no matter what movie you watch next, it's going to be fresh. All right, everyone, open your eyes.
I bet you didn't know you were getting that tonight.
No. Wow, Drew. Yeah, that was amazing experiencing that with you.
I needed that today. I needed that. I appreciate that. You should run an app. You could make your own app there.
Maybe if you guys enjoyed that, we might have to do more of these meditations. But to center us before we get into our discussions. Okay, Drew. So now that we're calm, let's jump right into Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, everyone. So there was an article recently, okay, by Vulture, and we're going to bring that up and read a little bit. And there are a lot of points that the Vulture article made, and I've tried to distill them down. And Drew and everyone watching, we can talk about these things and try to figure out what's going on. Although to me, it doesn't look very good for Rotten Tomatoes.
No.
So the first point, and I will read this from the article, and we'll read this section. It's an interesting story of corruption from this PR company called Bunker 15. And it's regarding a movie. You guys may have seen it. You may not have seen it. Drew, have you seen this movie, Ophelia? With Daisy
I know
Ridley?
of it, but I have not watched it.
Yeah. I'll say I've never met anyone who's seen it. I don't know if that matters or not. Anyway, so let's pull up this article, The Decomposition of Rotten Tomatoes. This got a lot of press, written by Lane Brown. And this is the first major sort of like expose of Rotten Tomatoes. And so let's read through this. In 2018, a movie publicity company called Bunker 15 took on a new project, Ophelia, a feminist retelling of Hamlet starring Daisy Ridley. Critics who'd seen early screenings had published 13 reviews. 7 of them were negative, which translated to a score of 46% on the all-important aggregation site Rotten Tomatoes. A disappointing outcome for a film with prestige aspirations and no domestic distributor. But just because the tomato meter says a title is rotten, scoring below 60%, it doesn't need to stay that way. Bunker 15 went to work. While most film PR companies aim to get the attention of critics from top publications, Bunker 15 takes a more bottom-up approach, recruiting obscure, often self-published critics who are nevertheless part of the pool tracked by Rotten Tomatoes. In another break from standard practice, several critics say Bunker 15 pays them $50 or more for each review. These payments are not typically disclosed, and Rotten Tomatoes says it prohibits reviewing based on a financial incentive. Of course, we don't know how hard they prohibit that.
Yeah.
In October of that year, an employee of the company emailed a prospective reviewer about Ophelia. Quote, It's a Sundance film, and the feeling is it's been treated a bit harshly by some critics. I'm sure sky high expectations were the culprit. So the teams involved feel like it would benefit from more input from different critics. Quote, more input from different critics is not very subtle code. And the prospective critic wrote back to ask what would happen if he hated the film. Bunker 15 employee replied that, of course, journalists are free to write whatever they like, but that, quote, super nice ones, and there are more critics like this than I expected, often agreed not to publish bad reviews on their usual websites, but to instead quarantine them on a, quote, smaller blog that Rotten Tomatoes never sees. I think it's a very cool thing to do. If it's done right, the trick would help ensure that Rotten Tomatoes logged positive reviews, but not negative ones. So the outcome of this, between October 2018 and January 2019, Rotten Tomatoes added 8 reviews to Ophelia's score. 7 were favorable. Wow. And most came from critics who have reviewed at least one other Bunker 15 movie. The writer of a negative review says that Bunker 15 lobbied them to change it. If the critic wanted to give a barely overall positive, sorry, let me go back. Wanted to, quote, give it a barely positive overall, then I do know the editors at Rotten Tomatoes and can get it switched. Okay. So the Bunker 15 employee offered to get it switched. I also discovered another negative review of Ophelia from this period that was not counted by Rotten Tomatoes by a writer whose positive reviews of other Bunker 15 films have been recorded by the aggregator. Ophelia climbed the tomato meter to 62%, flipping them from rotten to fresh. The next month, the distributor IFC Films announced that they had acquired Ophelia for release in the US. Okay, so that's, Drew, the first story. So I think that's the first thing we need to recognize, is that it looks like PR companies or these special interest companies are willing to pay for positive reviews. And this was kind of more for independent movies, obviously hoping for a distributor, but you have to wonder if this kind of thing happens even for not so small movies. How does that hit you when you hear that? Is that a surprise?
I don't want to say that I've always felt that this was probably happening, but I've always felt that this was probably happening. It's funny because a couple episodes of my show ago, Bad Way, my co-host, he even said it. He was like, "You think anyone's ever been paid off for reviews?" He speculated Siskel and Ebert, and we were kind of joking about that because that's like, that's very, very high up there in the chain in terms of reviewers. But it doesn't surprise me because when you think about this, right, like the goal of PR firms is to make their clients look great. And that's what they do. And they'll employ any tactic. I mean, everyone's watched like Billions and Succession and these shows that sort of dramatize things that probably really happen. And does it make it morally right? No, absolutely not. But I've always felt like this was probably happening on some scale, especially when you consider the fact that these scores make or break a movie. And, you know, especially when you think about how this actually works, it's like the score itself is an aggregate, like we said, right? So it's trying to deduce, is this a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment? And how it's actually determining that, I mean, there's a lot of gray area there. So a movie that has 7, forgot how many total there were, but basically it was a 46%, which was 7 out of 6 or something, or I'm sorry, 7 out of 13, whatever it was. But you start looking at the numbers and it's like, oh, we could get other people that are in this community, because you do have to be a Rotten Tomatoes approved reviewer. Like, it's not just like anybody can write something. So there's some merit there. But when you start looking at it, it's like, okay, well, maybe there's people that are on blogs or people that are on maybe like smaller outlets that still have a voice. Maybe they want to get some visibility to some things. Yeah, you could go and maybe influence them to say, well, have you really thought about how good this movie is? It's pretty good, right? It's great, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's completely scummy. I mean, it's completely scummy. But this kind of stuff, I hate to say it, but maybe I'm jaded by society, but like it doesn't surprise me at all. At all. Like when this came out, I was like, all right, I guess they proved what we all thought. Doesn't make it right.
No, and I think it's for me, and here I'll tell you where I'm coming from. I enjoyed the site when it first popped up, just as a movie fan, and I think it popped up like in the late '90s. I think I first saw it in the early 2000s, something like that. And I enjoyed it because instead of having to search the web for like specific
Yes.
critics and what, it was all in one place, and you could kind of see, oh, did so and so like it, did so and so not like it, and they gave a overall score, I guess,
Mhm.
which was kind of helpful. But at that point, though, all the critics that were in there were like the top critics. So these were critics who worked for major publications. They were well-known critics. They'd been around for a while. Their credentials were impeccable, and it was evaluating kind of those critics. But now, as we'll see, I mean, that's totally changed. And you're right, it's like it sucks, it's horrible, and it's like it's manipulated because it's like that score
Yeah.
is the most important thing, you
I
know.
think I think the way to look at these things, and I don't know if this might be philosophical, but you look at these things as tools because that's what they are, right? You're a consumer. I think everyone that watches this show, people that are out there, like we all work hard for every dollar that we make. And when you have a studio shoving these sort of rehashed things in your face, you want to understand, I worked really hard this week. Is it worth it for me to go spend the hard-earned money that I had to go watch this movie? And I think you're looking for every tool at your disposal to figure out whether it's worth it or not. I think if you take the score at face value, you're gonna have a bad time. But I think
Yep.
if you use it as a tool to say, like what you said, right? It's like I have a lot of thoughts on this, and people are inherently lazy too. They want shortcuts because it's like, well, I this movie stuck, so I'm not gonna go watch it or whatever. I saw the score. If you take like one extra minute and like dig into the score and start looking at like what you said, let's say you have a favorite critic or somebody that you know tends to like the kind of stuff that you like. And I think that's why movie critiquing is interesting because there's people that have wildly different tastes in everything, right? I tend to shade towards action movies. I'm not going to go to somebody that loves dramas, Oscar worthy dramas, and I'm not going to look for their opinion on Bloodsport because they're probably going to hate it. Right. But
Right.
I know that if there's somebody that's like, hey, bulletproof action or action movie junkies, like if they like something, yeah, like they have the same kind of taste as me, right? It's about
Hmm.
trying to find those things, but what makes it really difficult is when you've got PR companies then now seeding this stuff with, potentially fake or influenced reviews. How do you trust it, So that's like when you start digging into the data a little bit more, it's like, "Oh, well, can you even trust this now?" That's why I tend to like stuff like Letterboxd and IMDb because I don't know, maybe they're getting paid to write stuff on there too, but it's all about trying to find different sources of information. It's like the news, right? You can't just trust one news outlet. You gotta kind of do your research and try to understand and sift through everything. So that's my opinion on it, but, like, I think that this Bunker 15 thing really is controversial because they're literally paying people for something, and
Right.
that's unethical in a lot of ways, to be honest. So, I know we're
Right.
talking about movies, but it's to me, it's unethical.
Right. And it's almost like you could see where they're coming from a business standpoint. It's like a lot of people have put a lot of time and energy and money into making
Yep.
a movie, and it needs a distributor, and this is the one thing that would really help get it a distributor if we could massage those scores. And so um but yeah, it's like it is scummy because people depend upon critics. And so before we go in, I want to ask you this, Drew. You mentioned the idea of like following like-minded critics. If there's a critic, say for a superhero movie, you'd want to know that they think the same way you do. What if you found out that that critic wasn't always honest about their thoughts? Would you keep following them, or would you not?
I gotta be honest, I think it would probably affect me. Like, I still am gonna make my own conclusion on things, and that's just me as a person. Like, even if somebody hates it, like, I don't think it will say, "Oh, well, I'm not gonna watch that at all." I might say, "Well, that's interesting." Like, I might wanna check that out and see if I agree. But I think it might affect how I view that particular person. It's funny because, like, I think you think about the word influencer. And it's tough, right? It's all over YouTube. It's all over everywhere. Like everybody inherently is advertising something. It's kind of weird, right? Like it's you look at like cyberpunk and some of these other things that sort of tell the future about how corporations run everything. But, I was just playing Starfield. It's a good example of a game, right? And
Mhm.
I know that Microsoft and Bethesda sent people a bunch of swag. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
people that are like, "Well, can I trust the review on this game because they got like a swag kit, and is that gonna influence it?" And, there's a really good YouTube reviewer that does tech reviews. His name's Michael Fisher. Shout out to Michael Fisher. If you ever watch this, you're awesome. He's called Mr. Mobile. He does some awesome reviews, and he makes a very clear point to say, nobody paid for this review. I have not given people copy, review, edit permissions to watch this. Like, I didn't get paid. Like, they do send him stuff, but he makes it very clear, like, I'm not taking anything. I'm not influenced. Like, he gives his very clear thoughts on whether something's good or bad. And he's like somebody that I feel like, okay, I can trust them, you know?
Mhm.
Uh, so it's like you got to build the trust with people. And I think to your point, like if you found out that they were on the take, it would really affect me. It would really change my opinion of whether I could believe them or not. And, like, if I found out that Michael Fisher was paid off, that would be like, "Whoa," you know?
Right.
So, I don't know if that's, like, a good equivalent, but, yeah.
Right. And that's, I know, a whole different discussion is on the gaming side, because I'm sure reviews,
Yeah.
Metacritic score, all that kind of stuff, that's a whole different discussion, but maybe with some of the same issues. 42420 says even Amazon reviews
Yes.
are paid for mostly. It's a shame, and stores will offer you points or gift cards for reviews. It's kind of everywhere. It's a good point. AEH
Yeah.
says, I'm not surprised either. I've seen good movies that got bad reviews and bad movies with great ratings from film critics. Um, Max Kelly says, hello, how you doing, Max? And then Rabana says, then you have reviewers like the Nostalgia Critic, right? Well, and we'll get into that too, because there was a major change in how Rotten Tomatoes counted critics, and we'll get into that. Let me bring this up because I summarized the rest of that article. Okay, so the next point that they make is that Rotten Tomatoes can make or break movies, and we talked about this a little bit. That tomato meter score
Mhm.
changes how they're perceived, marketed, and which are greenlit. And it talks about how there are actually companies that will try to forecast Rotten Tomatoes scores for studios to try and figure out what they'll get from Rotten Tomatoes score. And I'm sure we've all seen advertising campaigns, TV commercials that highlight certified fresh, on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's a big deal. That score, it's like the holy grail. Let's see. So, and then the next point, and we can talk a bit more about this. And guys, I invited Drew too, because not only is he like a super amazing guy and expert on movies, he's an analyst. So like he understands this stuff and how things are calculated. And we should take a minute to talk about how these scores are calculated. And according to the article, the math sucks. And so if you get a 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes, that means that all the critics gave it a fresh score, which could mean like barely good, or it
Yep.
could mean amazing.
Yep.
And they talked about grades, but like this is my analogy, but it's like if you got a C in every class you're in, say in high school, you'd graduate with a 100% Rotten Tomatoes score,
Yeah.
just like a straight A student. Even though you two probably are very different students, you both get 100%. So it's kind of the same thing with movies. It doesn't tell you that something is good or how much better something is. And I don't know, Drew, do you want to kind of talk about that just for a second?
I
Like,
Yeah, I agree, and, one comment on the side you had for number 2 is, um, it's kinda like if you think about SEO, right? Like, people blame Google for, like, sort of the watering down of the internet, and
mhm,
it's like, it's kinda watering down of content as well, right? Because when you think about this and now with the rise of AI, I know that's been a topic that we've talked about on this show before, people are creating, like I was looking up something recently the other day, like, trying to find a review on something, and I think, 420 mentioned this about Amazon. Like, I'm trying to find something, and I'm like, "Man, Google search is not going to produce an answer to this, because what I'm going to get is some garbage article that is basically an affiliate link farm for me to send back to Amazon, that's basically optimized for SEO, so that it's like, here's the 10 best products of this, and they're just trying to sell it. And I feel like the Rotten Tomatoes score has become that as well, in that studios are optimizing the movie for that, and it waters it down to be, how can we make the most mediocre thing that's not going to either offend anybody or
Mhm.
not going to push the envelope. And when you think about like what art is, like art does push those envelopes, art does push those boundaries. And when you think about some of the best movies, there may be some really amazing movies that just aren't for you. And I think you can recognize that, but because it has a crappy Rotten Tomatoes score, it's like, oh, this movie's garbage. It's like, no, I can see the art in it, and I can see the passion that the filmmakers put into it, even if it's not something that I'm particularly interested in. And I think that also brings up the whole point of like, there's this hot take culture now where everything is either amazing or it sucks. There's
Right.
nothing in between. And it's like everybody is either like enamored with something or just outraged with it. And it's like these clicks and all of that stuff sort of generates this echo chamber. And I think Rotten Tomatoes is part of that. Like, if you think about some of the snippets that they put, like some of the words that people use in the reviews, like they're trying to snipe at like the movie and put like why it's a piece of garbage or why it's this, and everyone sort of one ups the other, and it becomes this thing. But your point about the actual calculation of the score is spot on. Like the way you put the grade, like if you got a C in school, like, it's either amazing or it sucks. Like, again, right? Yes or
Right.
no. Is it good or
Right.
bad? Like, that's not like a way that something works. It's not good or bad. And I don't know a better way to do it. I mean, the point of the site, I think, has changed over the years, and things have evolved, and maybe that also isn't fair to the site itself. And they're it is a tool, like we said, that's used for certain things, but people do look at it as a score of how good it is out of 100 instead of a yes or no. And I don't
Mhm.
think, like, maybe the score itself, like saying, oh, it's 64%, is like, oh, 60% out of 100 in terms of how good it is. It's more
Right.
64% of people said it was a good movie, like a fresh or not.
Right.
But people don't look at it that way, you know? I'm kind of rambling, but hopefully that makes sense. Like, it's hard to
Yeah,
describe.
it is hard to describe, and it's some people have said it started with Siskel and Ebert because, they were the first ones to do, thumbs up,
Yeah.
thumbs down. So it's kind of like that
Yeah.
thing, but they were pretty clear. Like if you read their reviews, that 3 stars and above is a thumbs up. So that means that they would recommend it. And thumbs down would be less than that. And I think though what we've run into is so many critics have different ways of critiquing a movie. And you know as we've and let me bring this up because this is an important point going forward, is that the star part, critics can submit their review as fresh or rotten, or they can let Rotten
Mhm.
Tomatoes pick. So this is interesting because it brings up a potential maybe conflict between the content of a review, and when they submit the review, if it's borderline, they may decide to give it a fresh or a rotten, maybe depending on external factors. You know what I mean? And I think we're going to maybe see some examples of that, where if you read the content of the review, you'd come away with a very negative
Yeah.
impression, but then all of a sudden on Rotten Tomatoes, it's a fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and, if you were submitting, I mean, I wouldn't want them picking for me if I was submitting. Like, I would wanna make that determination myself, as a critic or as somebody, right? Like, I don't know that I'll ever be an approved Rotten Tomato reviewer, but I would wanna make that determination myself. I wouldn't want them to make that call for me. And to your point, if you're borderline, like, how do you decide whether it's fresh or rotten? Like,
Hmm.
I don't there's very few, I'll say this, there's very few movies that I've watched that I'm like, "Oh, man, this thing was not good." Like, I can
Right.
think of a couple, but very few. I mean, most of the time I try to we used to talk about this all the time, I try to find the silver linings in something, right? Like very few movie makers make a movie and say, you know what, let me make a piece of crap here. Like they don't do that, right? You're trying your best for the most
Mhm.
part, unless you're doing some type of weird tax scheme or something, like in the
Right.
producers. But I think, every filmmaker for the most part probably goes into something trying to do a good job. And I try to like go into a movie watching something with that in my mind. Like, okay, they tried to do something here. Maybe it didn't work for me, but maybe other people really liked it. There's a lot of movies that came out that had legs later. Like, especially a lot of the 80s and 90s movies that we've talked about, they call them cult classics for a reason, right? I mean, we did a
Right.
show on that, I think. So,
Yes. Yeah. I know. It's really interesting how everything's set up. When Rotten Tomatoes first came out, I'll say this before going on to the next point. I heard a lot of complaints from movie lovers that there wasn't kind of a mixed tomato rating. Like it was just fresh or rotten.
yeah.
And there's no like gray area in the middle. Which I think that's kind of getting to your point. It's like movies are rarely, great or horrible, and a lot of them are sometimes in the middle, but they're still worth seeing,
Yeah.
even though it's in the middle. There's a lot good in there, and you know, except for movies like Speed 2, Cruise Control, right, Drew?
That is one movie where I'm like, I don't think I need to watch that again. I'm glad I saw it because I thought about it for, hey, what is this movie about? I don't think it was terrible, but I just don't think it made sense, and they centered the movie around one stunt. So that's where maybe it didn't go well. But I think he tried, like, he wanted to do a good job. So
Right, right. I know. Isn't that funny? Well, um, Drew, let me get to a few comments here before we go
sure.
into the next phase of our discussion. Don Ranger Power says, hello, Ken and all, and Drew, and happy Animaniacs Day. I hope everyone is well.
Ah, Animaniacs
Happy
Day.
Animaniacs Day. Very cool. Wank Shaftesbury says, I had suspicion about Rotten Tomatoes for a few years now. Yes. 420 says, some movies bombed, but because cult classics,
Yeah,
I kind of just, watch it myself. Yeah, of course,
I agree.
and definitely check out Drew and I did this conversation on cult classics. A lot of fun. Drew Tube, great to
Hey,
see you.
Drew.
Thanks for joining us, Drew. So Drew, okay, let's get back. So we have up to this point talked about how these things are calculated. Now let's move into how they're manipulated. Again, according to this Vulture article. So the first thing they do is they play the verified audience review game for early positive scores. So I'm sure anyone who uses Rotten Tomatoes, you go in and there are these scores, and they're kind of not easy to see. In fact, maybe I'll just bring this up. I'll just add this here. Okay, because we're going to get into this as an example pretty soon. But you have like these scores that they kind of promote on here, but that's not all the scores. You can click
Yeah.
around here. So look over on the audience score. So what we see here for The Little Mermaid, this is the remake, is 94% verified audience. That's very different from the all audience, right? So with that in mind, that's what the verified audience score is. And what the verified scores are is they came after Captain Marvel. I believe that was 2016,
Mhm.
2017, was review bombed. And this happened with a number of movies where, people just review bombed it and they felt like it was unfair. And so they changed how they did the audience scores. And then so a verified score would be if you bought a ticket through Fandango. Warner Brothers basically sold it to Fandango. So if you buy your movie ticket through Fandango, you can write a verified audience review. And so, but Drew, what the verified audience reviews do is if you have a group of people who are diehards who are really looking forward to a movie and they buy their tickets through Fandango, they can go watch the movie and they're more likely, according to the article, to give it a positive review rather than, just a free for all where everyone can vote and write their own review. So what they're trying to do by kind of skewing it that way is trying to pump up the early word of mouth. And I think that that's really what a lot of this manipulation is. It's the pre-release leading up to the launch. They want that first weekend to be as explosive as possible. And so they're trying to make the movie look as good as possible with these review scores. And one way they're doing it is through this verified audience review score. So give me your thoughts on this verified audience review score versus all audience, that type of thing.
It's a tricky one because I understand why they need a verified audience, because otherwise it could be subject to review bomb. But I think you raise a point in that, most people that are going to go out there and write something are people that either influenced to write something positive or negative. But I think to your point, it's like people that are probably more excited about it. And like, can I blame studios for trying to get positive word of mouth? No, right? Because if you have people that are excited about stuff, it's almost like voting, right? Like you want people to vote, so you go out and you canvass and you tell people, "Hey, go vote." Like, is there anything wrong with that? No, right? You're encouraging people to do something. When you start paying and exchanging money, that's where it starts to get down this ethical, moral, probably negative place. I'm okay with them promoting, audience members to say, "Hey, leave us a review," right? People do that. I
Mhm.
mean, we do that with
Sure.
our shows. Like, I think you want people to be excited about something. Um, it's interesting though when you start to segregate the verified versus non-verified. How are they really verifying? Can you verify the verified? Like, it's
Right.
who are those people? Yeah, they bought a ticket on Fandango, but to your point, are we looking at where the money's going and who's paying for that? You could have studio executives buying tickets. You could have, I mean, who knows?
Right.
It makes me miss, and this is going to sound like a really old man thing to say, but it makes me miss sort of like the days when the internet was like, not that you could trust what was on the internet, but it
Right.
was like a bunch of people coming out there that, hey, we're just writing on Angel Fire and GeoCities. And now it's like you
Right.
can't trust anything that you see. You really can't.
Right. I
It was
know.
a simpler time back in the day.
You're 100% correct. And I love what you said, because I agree with you that this, and I'm surprised no one's really dug into this because it's so obvious to me that there's a huge conflict of interest here. So Fandango owns Rotten Tomatoes.
Yep.
So the way that you can get your review verified is if you buy your ticket through Fandango. So that means your money is going to Fandango, who owns Rotten Tomatoes. So it's sort of like you're paying to be able to review on their
Mhm.
site, essentially.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem, I think. And again, if you're a studio and you're wanting to promote your movie, I agree. Ask for the reviews, that's fine. But I think this is more on the side of Rotten Tomatoes, the site, if it's claiming to be an accurate
Yes.
aggregator of reviews. And its service supposedly is to provide everyone with like an accurate viewpoint of what people think, whatever that means. So this is a problem for me. And I think it's a very easy way to game the advanced scores. And I think we're going to get into specifics and we'll look at what I think is evidence of that. But look at how much money is used to promote movies these days. Like something like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. You're looking at a marketing budget of north of $150 million, right?
Yeah.
Now, if it's so important to get a good score, if that helps word of mouth, if that's important to the industry, that would be a very small part of that marketing budget to actually purchasing tickets through Fandango and therefore writing reviews for your own movie
Yeah.
and influencing that score. And you're right. It's like, how do we know? Do they even track who's buying? Or
Yeah.
is it just, people who pay, it doesn't matter. They get it, they get a vote. And I think we're going to see evidence of that pretty soon. That's just my feeling. But do you agree that
I
that's
agree.
possible? Is that too controversial?
No, no, and I think it is a huge conflict of interest because, like, I remember I don't remember exactly what happened. It was I know we'll talk a little bit more about some of the superhero movies and stuff, but I remember somebody saying like I don't remember if Warner had a stake in this at some point. Maybe it was before some of the acquisitions with AT&T and stuff like that, and then the subsequent divestiture. But there was something where they said, "Oh, these guys are paying for their own movie reviews," and people were sort of like, "Oh, come on, that's crazy." Like, "Oh, why would you care about that? Who cares? These things are great." But now it's starting to come out, and again, like, as a company, you're gonna do whatever it takes to make your thing successful, but it's scummy. It's scummy as
Right.
heck, and that doesn't take away the hard work that people put into making these movies, for sure, but at the same time, it's like, man, can you trust it as a consumer? Like, somebody brought up that we talked about the Amazon reviews, right? Man, you have to go to, like, what is it, Fake Spot? So you can see whether these are actual real reviews now or something.
Right.
Everything's a bot
Right.
farm. It's like it's a
Yep.
shame really that the internet has kinda turned into that you can't really you have to dig through so much junk to get to something that is of substance. That's why I actually like YouTube so much and other things where you can go kind of like direct to the source because you can say, "Hey, like I want to like when I first started watching your channel, it's like, "Hey, what does Ken Cole think about these things?" Cool. Like I relate to your style and whatever. I can kind of listen to you, and hear what you think about stuff versus having to sift through like these auto AI generated articles of did anybody even write this? Who knows? Maybe it was
Right.
it was a bot that wrote it. It's a
Right.
shame. So,
Yeah, indeed. And you were talking about it being better back in the day, Drew. Robana says it was simpler back in the day, where you base your opinion on a movie by Siskel and Ebert, giving the movie a thumbs up or thumbs down. That being said, there were a few movies that were good. Yeah. So the thing is, I think with Siskel and Ebert, it's true that they did up, thumbs down, but the difference is that you formed a relationship with them by watching them week after week. It's sort of like being on television. They were kind of like movie buddies or fellow
yeah,
film fans that you could watch and you knew what their personalities were. And sometimes you'd know that, oh, Siskel, man, he really doesn't have that great a sense of humor. So if this is a comedy, I it
yeah,
makes sense that he doesn't like that. I actually think I might like that. It's sort of you knew who these people were. It wasn't faceless like Rotten Tomatoes. And all these Amazon reviews, you don't know who these people are,
yeah,
and so that personal connection that Drew, I think you said you go to YouTube for,
yeah.
that authenticity is very valuable, and you're not getting that on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, like there's a couple YouTube channels that I like to watch. I like Chris Stuckman. He's not doing as many reviews as he used to do in the past because he's doing filmmaking now. But like him, Jeremy Johns is another great channel. I like John Flickinger, Flickpick. Like those
Mhm.
are like movie the guys that I feel like I start to know them. I've watched
Yeah,
their videos for so long that I start to get their style. And even
right.
if they say, "Hey, this is bad," or "I don't really like it," like I can kind of work around it, and it becomes more of like a gauge or like a point of interest that I can then make a decision on or a decision against versus there's this faceless number or percentage that somebody's putting their stock in. And like I said it before, right? People are inherently lazy. They want reasons to kind of either do something or not do something. And I think it's really easy to say, oh, it's a 32% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's garbage. I'm not going to
Right,
bother. And
right.
unfortunately, it does influence people. Um, people won't just go and look at stuff. So I think it's all about like I said before, like the news, right? It's about finding what you think is something that you can make a decision based on. They're all inputs to me. At least that's how I try to look at it. It's an
Mhm.
input to a decision that I'm going to make, and I'll make my own decision whether the movie is good or bad. It may influence me to say I'm not going to go to the theater and watch it. Maybe I'll rent it at home
Right.
or watch
That
that. But I
which is a
try to
big deal.
research it. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of things that like the Flash. I mean, we'll probably talk about it, but that's one
Mhm.
that I have some thoughts on too. Whether it's a good movie
Right.
or not is one thing, but um, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, all these are great points, and, apologize because I actually skipped one, so let's talk about this. This is another way to manipulate. So they play the, quote, "friendly critic first" game for positive word of mouth. So these are, like, established critics.
hmm
Um, so what they'll do if you've got someone who's trying to game the system is they're going to show this to critics who they anticipate will give it a positive review. And apparently, all these movie studios and PR companies, marketing divisions, they keep lists of critics and how they've rated in the past. And they know, they have a good idea of, are they going to be friendly or not? And so if you're determined to be friendly, they'll show you the movie first, hoping to juice up the initial critic score and get positive word of mouth, hopefully leading to an amazing opening weekend. And one example they gave was Ant-Man Quantumania, right? That's one that everyone's been trashing, but Disney showed the movie early to genre sites, fan sites, comic book movie critics, and it started with a 79% tomato meter score. So people go there, they're like, oh, Ant-Man's coming out, Ant-Man 3 is coming out. What's going on? And they go on Rotten Tomatoes and see it's got 79. They go, oh, you know what? That sounds good. I'm looking forward to that. Maybe I'll go see it. But once they showed it to more critics, that dropped down to 46%. And so that was a very steep drop for Ant-Man 3. And the buzz around that, I think, is one of, we'll talk about, this has happened a lot, where people go in with high expectations and then people are almost kind of miffed because they feel like they were lied to and the movie isn't as good as they anticipated. And they're like, why was that rated so highly? A lot of people have that feeling, and I think they're upset and they vent.
And I can't blame the business for doing that, because that's just smart business, right? Show it to people so you get like, whether you think that that's scummy or not, I don't know. Like, it's probably smart on their part because they want to get positive buzz about it, and the people that might not like it, they maybe won't show it to them first or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I feel conflicted on that one. I think it's smart business practice, but I think it's also then for somebody to just base their decision only on a score, then that's also a thing where, again, you can't trust Rotten Tomatoes as your source of truth because you've got to dig a little bit deeper. But as an average moviegoer, like, you're not going to know who a lot of those folks are. You just won't. And it's like, how do you know whether this person tends to trend positively on specific movies? It comes back to what we said. You kind of have to almost find like other people that you can single out and say, hey, these 5 critics kind of have my same sense of things, or that's your gauge of, for these things. Because the score, it's a faceless number, right? And
Right.
you don't really have the option to kind of understand that. And it's what makes it so difficult, I think, for people. And that's why I think, like, it's almost like you got to form your own opinion on things. You really do. And this is just one tool in a toolkit of things that you do to make your opinion and make decisions. If you put all your eggs in this basket, you're gonna have a bad time, I think.
Well, and that's the reason why a lot of huge filmmakers like Martin Scorsese and all these others, they hate Rotten Tomatoes because they're not, as you say, people are lazy. Like, they're not doing the work. They're not going through and finding critics that they like. And the fact that the Rotten Tomatoes score has replaced critics, like, people don't try and find critics. Maybe they do on YouTube, or they try to find people they like on YouTube. But as far as like traditional critics, it's just the tomato meter now. And 80s Nostalgia says, so that's why these sites matter, because people do base whether they buy the ticket or not, depending on Rotten Tomatoes rating. Okay, so Drew, here, I'm going to add another fly to the ointment. This is another tactic they use to juice these scores. They play the, quote, everyone's a critic now game for inflated scores. So a big change happened in 2018 where Rotten Tomatoes, they started to allow, well, previously, let's go back. It used to be just top critics. So top critics were basically critics employed by major publications, or they had huge amounts of verifiable traffic. They were well known as movie critics, and that's what the tomato meter was based on. Now, I would argue that that's, there was a problem with potentially, does this show accurate representation? Are the critics who are professionally employed, do they represent the population? Is this actually, okay, I understand those, but at the same time, those critics that were employed by major publications, they were already employed, right? So they had, their job was secure. It didn't matter what they wrote. access didn't matter because they were a card-carrying member of the press. Like that was their job. And so hopefully they wouldn't be influenced. Their job depended on them being unbiased, essentially. But in 2018, they changed that. Rotten Tomatoes allowed bloggers, YouTubers, and podcasters to be recognized critics. And now it's on the site as all critics versus top critics. And since 2016, the average Rotten Tomato score for a wide release has been boosted from 50%, which was rotten, to in 2021, 60% fresh. That is a major inflation of scores.
This one's an interesting one, and I have conflicting feelings on this because the first point that you brought up, it's like you could argue, and I'm not saying this is true or not true, but you could say that yes, in the past, and I think people talk about like, oh, Walter Cronkite's a good example. Like you watch the news, you trust Walter Cronkite because he's just giving you the news. And then at some point, whenever it happened, maybe it was advertising, maybe it was sort of the hot click advertising sort of culture, things became more outrage based and, there was more opinion and entertainment on the news. So one could argue, well, oh, why should I trust I don't know, whatever, New York Times for their movie review because that guy could be getting paid off too because they're a big corporation, right? I trust the more the YouTuber. So it's really a difficult one. I think this data though is important because you're starting to see that a 10% jump over, 5 years there is a pretty big increase in it. Is it more respective of the general population because you have people that are not like if Siskel and Ebert had to watch Speed 2 Cruise Control, and are they in the right mindset to be looking at that? They're professionals, right? So you would think that they try to look at it in a way that is objective and not, influenced by other things. I don't know, like it's a really tricky one because who are the YouTubers? Who are the podcasters? Like I think a general population is there's people that care more about what they do. There's people that are a bit more loose with it. Like how do you become a RT approved critic? What is the rigor that goes into that process? And what are your credentials? Like, could I become one? I guess I could. And I don't know, like, should people trust my opinion? I don't know. It's an interesting data point though, because a 10% boost it's a big jump in just, 5 years there or whatever.
Well, in the article, they kind of detailed that after they made that change, they admitted 1,000 new critics, who were bloggers, YouTubers, and podcasters, and really their makeup, as far as like their background, sort of the groups they represented, really didn't move the needle in terms of the overall critics. Like it was still, a lot of guys and a lot of white people, and so it's like, did that help? Really? Did that help the problem?
I'm personally on the record okay with bloggers, YouTubers, and podcasters being approved for this because I do feel like I'm pretty sure some of the guys I named are actually Rotten Tomato approved reviewers. I like being able to extend this to people that are, you don't have to be studying your whole life to get into news. Like you can work into a career to say, you know what, I'm going to learn to become like a film critic, and it's more accessible to people that it's not maybe like a gatekeeped profession or something like that in that regard. So I am a fan of it being more accessible to folks. I think what you just have to be mindful of is that just like we talked about influencers with, oh, I'm going to send you this product and you tell me that it's great. Like you're maybe more susceptible to that because it's not always like a profession. It may be something on the side, but I don't know. Like I don't want to say that they shouldn't be, but I also see where that can get manipulated as well. It's sort of the evolution of the internet, right? And we talk about the news too. Same thing. There's like non-corporate based news, and those are bloggers too. So whether you trust them or not is up to the individual, but it's a tricky one. It's not black and white, I think, in that point.
It's not black and white. And I think my main hesitation with allowing kind of opening it up to say YouTubers and bloggers and podcasters is that, if they're not really making much money at that and they want that to be a career, I think they're very susceptible to manipulation. Like, we talked about Bunker 15. paying,
Yeah.
for, oh, can you just kind of switch that review? Yeah, it's borderline anyway. Or you know what? Keep your review, but just kind of put it on a different site that Rotten Tomatoes wants, and we'll give you money. Or there's the access thing. So like with Disney, I know they do this for a fact, is they have very special VIP premieres. Well, they will invite bloggers and YouTubers and influencers to watch the movie. And even if they're not giving them money, they're giving them such a VIP experience,
There's an
maybe with some of the
exchange.
stars there. Yeah, it's like where you come away from that just so excited by the whole experience, and they wrap the movie into that you come away with a positive, impression. And if you walk away and you don't like the movie and you're like, oh man, if I give them bad review, they're probably not going to invite me anymore.
There,
You know,
there's
that
Yeah, there's a big thing to be said, specifically on YouTube in tech reviews. So the Apple is a there's a
mm,
lot that's out there about Apple where if in the past, and I won't name any channels, but there's channels out there, if you look for them, you can find them. People that may have not been kind to like Apple, it's like, well, you're not going to get invited to these premieres anymore, and you can't go. And it's
right.
it's a weird thing in that you feel this pressure, like you can't say something bad about the product because then you can't go. But then that's where you say, like, what are the ethics of this? And the companies, and I'm sure that's the same with movie studios too. They do the same thing, right? Like, oh, we're not going to invite you again. And it's
Yep.
this exclusive access thing. And you've got to stick to your ethics, I guess, but then you might lose your job too. It's a really tricky one. I think the people are in a tough place because they're not outright paying you per se, to your point, but they're giving you an experience and there's an exchange there that makes it it's a little tough for the person that's on the review side of things, I think, to your point.
Right. Which, I'm not saying that traditional critics couldn't have been
Sure.
manipulated too, but it seems like it would be tougher because their job is to be impartial. They are getting paid a salary, and they see every movie, and their name means something. So it's not so much that the critic needs the movie studio to give them something. It's more like the movie studio hopefully needs the critic because they
Right.
have that credibility. And so, yeah, so I don't know. I'm really mixed on the allowing all these new critics to be part of Rotten Tomatoes, just because it does seem like a lot of them could be much more easily influenced. But I agree, though, it's like a lot of them are legitimate and I think want to do a good job and have great things to say. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gray. It's a great area. Drew, do you want to dive into some examples?
Yes. Let's please.
Okay.
I'm excited to talk about some of these.
Okay. So, guys, the first one, I don't know if you've seen this before. This is the 2023 remake of The Little Mermaid. Here's a poster with Fandango on it. Strangely enough, they own Rotten Tomatoes. So we looked at this before, Drew, but let me bring this up again. This is the Rotten Tomatoes page for The Little Mermaid, starring Halle Bailey. Did you ever see this movie, Drew?
I haven't. And the original is one of my one of the first Disney movies that I remember seeing. So,
Right.
it always has sort of a nostalgic place for me. I have not seen the new one. In fact, a friend of mine was just telling me that they enjoyed this, but
Mhm.
I haven't seen it yet.
Right. It's okay. So that's good. You're going into this neutrally. So you can look at this data. I've seen it, and I won't influence it either way. Whatever my opinion of this was, but let's just look at the Rotten Tomatoes data. Okay, so we come onto the site and we see it has a tomato meter score of 67% out of 340 reviews. And the audience score is 94%. So what do you think, Drew, when you see this?
So I look at this as when I look at this objectively, it's like this is a movie that the critics didn't like for whatever reason, or they thought it was okay. But man, the general population really liked this thing. Like
Right.
94%, that's pretty good. 67 means like, okay, maybe they didn't like it as a remake or something, which I probably would fall into that camp. But okay, the critics found something they didn't like, but generally speaking, the audience score is people really like this thing. That's how I would interpret it when I see it.
Right. And if you happen to frequent Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see this and maybe just casually as you're looking through, and this might form an impression. Okay. But as we've talked about before, there are different types of scores. So let's click into this. You have to click in to see the different scores. Okay. So these are the scores that we saw before. Now, what I think is interesting, Drew, is that we see the tomato meter score, the one that's on the main page is 67%, but this is all critics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But they don't do that with the audience score. They only show the verified audience score
Mm-hmm.
instead of the all audience score. You would think if they're being consistent,
Yeah.
they would display the top critics and verified audience, right? Those are the specially curated reviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a bizarre thing. So anyway, let's go back over here and let's see what the top critics thought. Okay.
Interesting.
So just straight down the middle. So it's a splat from the top critics. But once we get in all the extra critics who aren't top critics, it's higher.
Well, and click on top critics again. So the other point to put here, right, is a lot of times people are going to look at this and be like, oh, it's a 50% out of 100 quality. And
Right.
again, to the point of this, it's half the people liked it and half the people didn't like it. And when you say didn't like it, even that is not black and white either. It's 50-50 in terms of like, you know what, it was mixed is what they would say. But the
Right.
actual data behind that, you can't even get that from this. You got to go into all the individual reviews.
Right, exactly. Right. And it's like you look at that, it's a splat, but you're right. It's like it's mixed. To me,
Mhm.
it means something if half of people like it
Mhm.
and half of people don't. Like that means I think there's merit to it, but it looks like it doesn't have merit.
Yeah.
But still, here's another thing too. Look at this. 49% of 69 are top critics.
Mhm.
All critics
340.
340. That
Mhm.
is a huge difference. And why do I'm sorry. What I don't understand is why do you want non-top critics? Like if you're calling someone a top critic, there's got to be a reason for that. And there are so many non-top critics that are influencing the score, and it's like it waters down the
It does.
top critics. And I that's one thing I don't understand.
Can you click on the question mark next to tomato meter? Does it tell you the difference between all critics and top critics? I wasn't sure if it didn't. Okay. I don't know, and I'll have to look it up after, but I'm not sure how they determine top versus all. I'm curious about that. I'm gonna have to look into that one. I can't
Mhm.
remember what they did, but yeah, I mean, it's an important distinction. And I mean, it changes on a given movie, but did you know if do they always default to all critics? I haven't checked in a while, or if they've changed it, because my
I
suspicion
think
is
they
they
have.
would. Okay.
Yeah. So they've defaulted to all critics.
Yeah.
And I think they always have. And you have to click in to see what top critics say.
Yeah.
And this is what the old guard like me, who kind of watched the site since its
Mhm.
inception, this is what I go to because I want to see the top critic. These are the names I recognize who've been
Mhm.
reviewing movies for decades. You know, we can kind of track what they've liked, the masterpieces, versus the duds over the years. So these would probably be the ones that I would be interested in seeing, as opposed to these. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And we've talked about how bloggers and YouTubers are potentially influencing that score. Disney might have given some of those VIP screenings,
Mhm.
gotten them very excited, maybe. Now let's move over to the audience scores, right? Look at this 94%, over 10,000 plus verified ratings. And then let's go to all audience.
Mhm.
Now, this is different, Drew, because it's not that binary fresh or rotten. People are actually voting their own star rating.
Yeah.
So for the audience scores. So if you look at the verified audience, it's 4.7 out of 5. That's almost perfect. But then everyone else is like really down the middle, like a 3.2.
Yeah.
So what does this tell you?
It's interesting because it comes back to what you said before about, is this review bombed? Is it and you don't know, right? Like, I think inherently a lot of Disney movies these days are controversial, in that for a couple reasons. Like, people put there's politics involved on whatever side you're on. And then the other thing that they try to do is they've been remaking like all these movies that people either have very strong attachments to, and like, I don't know, I think I can be an old man and say I don't think they need to remake them, but then again, I guess it's new generations of people that are experiencing them. I'm not sure, what side of the aisle people are on, but I think it starts to show you like, okay, again, to the point you made earlier, you've got verified audience. These are people that had Fandango tickets. They went in there and reviewed it. This all audience, I don't know who it is, but it's a massive difference. So like, why is that? And that's where what I tend to do then is I might click into some of those even further, like to the point you said earlier, you got to go in further and you've got to start looking at it. And it's like, okay, well, why? I do that sometimes with Amazon. You sort on by 1-star reviews and you start to see what people say, and whether you can trust those or not too. You start to almost dig a little bit deeper. It's like you go further into the rabbit hole, but it's very interesting that it's such a discrepancy. It's like a 50% difference, right? In that.
Right.
But it's just, I don't know. My personal opinion is I don't think they needed to remake this, but I don't know. Who am I?
Right.
So I don't know. That might influence my own score of that if I saw it.
Right. Exactly. Well, Drew, I thought we could go further. We're going to dig
Yeah.
in. We're going to dig in. And I think what we should do is a little qualitative analysis and try to figure out what's going on. So what I did was I went to the release day. So I went back. These verified reviews are from the release day of The Little Mermaid this year. And I wanted to go down and let's look at these 5-star verified reviews. And I want to get a sense of the content of these reviews. Okay. And I'm going to suggest that a lot of these reviews read like they're bots, or that the person writing it really didn't see the movie, because they're not saying anything specific about the movie. It's just very short generalizations and not very helpful if I want to go see a movie, as opposed to the audience scores. We'll get to that in a second. So let's read through. And Drew, please disagree with me if you see it differently. But some of these I think are real. Such a beautiful rendition of the original. Halle Bailey pulled off such a great performance. Now look at this one. So many tears. Disney did it right. Absolutely beautiful. Best Disney live action film to date. Some of these sound like the dream reviews of Disney here. This looks legit to me. There are a lot of details. It's like they went to see it. Healing My Inner Child. Waited 5 years. See, that's good. Amazing movie. Loves the animations and the acting. It was really fantastic. Okay. I love how they kept to the animation but added new songs. So that seems right. CGI was horrible. Loved the movie. It was an awesome remake. So to me, it looks like a mix, a modern fantastic movie and beautifully cast. Well done. Great movie. Halle Bailey was amazing as Ariel. And let's see, we can go.
I think the
let me
more
go back.
detail you get, the more realistic it seems in some of these. But I think sometimes like it's so hard to tell, because as somebody reading it is like, if I'm going to leave a review, am I going to spend the time to write like a really detailed one? Or am I going to just write a quick thing? Or do I write anything at all? Or do I just give a score? Because like I'm on, for example, I'm on Letterboxd, and I don't typically write a lot of stuff on there, but I also don't just go 5. Like it's nuanced, right? And like when you see these, like the one from Joy there, like Sebastian was the highlight. Like was that 3.5? If I'm seeing that correctly,
Right.
like that to me is more believable than just 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars, 5. Like I don't know.
Right.
It's a weird thing. Like I don't give everything 5 stars. It's I don't know if anyone's on Untapped. If you drink different beers, like the same thing, right? Like if you just give everything 5 stars, then nothing is 5 stars, right? It's like
Exactly. And keep in mind, like the average score is pretty much 5 stars verified for this. And then you can see these Sebastian's the highlight, breathtaking, beautiful, visually stunning, did not disappoint. And it's like a lot of these 5-star reviews are kind of short. And I want to contrast that with the audience scores. Now, here are some audience scores. And you can see that people are actually, a lot of people are disappointed. And some of them are kind of like drive-bys, but a lot of people are legitimately disappointed and they have a lot to say about it. And it seems like the all audience scores are even the 5-star here, very detailed. People are very
Yeah.
motivated to review it and give their feelings on what's going on. Um, and it's just so, to me,
Yeah.
markedly different than looking back at the verified reviews. And you think that these people would, especially if they're Disney fans or excited to see the movie and they went to see the movie, this is opening day. You would think that they would be very detailed in how much they liked the movie.
These do
But
read more like a bot compared to the other ones. Even the
right.
negative reviews or the positive reviews, like look at the one from Megan there. Being a 90s child, I lived and breathed,
Yes.
like that's very detailed and written versus
Right.
amazing heart emoji, heart emoji, which I don't know, like even eBay reviews sometimes you read, it's like, is this real or not? Like it's man, I hate that we have to be detectives to like figure out whether something is like worth like watching or not, you know, but you do need to sift through this stuff because you can't just take it as, oh, here's a percentage, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
very strong possibility that that stuff is fake. It's a very, very strong, even the verified ones. And by putting a verified badge on it, it's like, oh, it's real. Are you
Yep.
sure? Are you
Right.
sure?
I think that there's a significant possibility that they're not real because I'm sorry, I forget who mentioned this before, but these read like Amazon reviews.
Yes.
These 5-star Amazon reviews that are bought and paid for.
Hmm.
I mean, you would think that the people who would be reviewing on from Fandango, who bought their movie, they've or bought their ticket through Fandango, they'd be really into movies and want to really show their thoughts. They have deep thoughts about these movies and write them. And
Yeah.
these are very sort of blasé reviews that are verified. It's strange to me.
Yeah.
Um, uh, okay, so that's The Little Mermaid. And by the way, I saw it. I did not like the movie. I kind of agree with. I thought it was disappointing. I thought Halle Bailey did a good job, but I was actually kind of disappointed by this movie. And so that it really struck me when I saw that such a high, it's such a high verified audience score. It didn't seem to make sense, you know. But uh, anyway, Drew, let's go on to The Last Jedi. How about that?
Oh, that's a good
So
one.
so
This is a
Drew,
good one.
it's so I know you're gonna feel very connected to this.
Yeah.
And let me back out here real quick. So what were your thoughts on Last Jedi and that whole thing? Because I know that that was a weird
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance moment for a lot of us.
I I feel like it's far enough from when I saw it that I can be objective about it, you know? Like I'm not like a diehard Star Wars fan, but I really like Star Wars, right? I grew up watching it and I watched the original trilogy and then and then I watched the prequels and I know people hated the prequels, but they've aged like a fine wine over time if you can appreciate them for what they are.
Mhm.
Uh the whole new trilogy just in general to me is something where it's like an example of how not to do a trilogy. Like you should probably have a overarching plan. Like I don't if I went into anything with my own job like that and didn't have an overarching plan, I'd probably be fired. So
Right.
I don't know. That's just my hot take opinion on it. But I'll say that that movie went and became the movie that people quoted as subverting expectations. And it
Mm,
became this thing where you had to either love it or hate it, and the people that hated it had legitimate reasons to hate it, and I think it had many things that I think bothered people about it. I did not really like it that much, to be honest. I thought there was moments that were kinda cool, but as a sequel to what it was, it just felt like it was going so far off the beaten path, and we'll have to do a whole show on this one time,
right.
but, just to kinda summarize it, sorry to go into the detail, it just felt like it didn't feel like it made sense to me, and it didn't seem like something that was working, but I felt like there was then became, like, these keyboard warriors that had to defend it and say why it's the greatest thing ever
Right.
to sort of combat the people that didn't like it, and it's like, you know, my opinion is let people like things and let people don't like things. If you like it, good for you. If you don't, good for you too. Like, I don't know where there has to be this defense of everything of like, you know, and I'm surprised. I'm curious if we'll see that in some of the reviews because I would suspect we might. So I don't know.
Right.
I have a lot of thoughts on that movie that I probably can't distill to the next like 1 minute.
Right. Well, I I come from the same place you do on this.
Yeah.
I will say going into this movie, going into The Force Awakens, going into The Last Jedi, I'm a big Star Wars fan. I refuse to watch anything, read anything. I wanted to go in blank on
Yeah,
all of these.
fresh.
I didn't want to know anything about it. Going fresh, not rotten. And with The Last Jedi, I went into it and I knew, and I'll bring this up here. I had an idea that the critic rankings were high,
Yeah.
like, and I couldn't get away from some advertisements that said like the best one since Empire Strikes Back, like critics saying this, and I didn't pay too much attention because I didn't want to listen to it. I wanted to go in fresh. And so, but I had a little bit of that expectation that, wow, okay, cool. Like, and Luke's back, and that's fun. And so I saw the movie, and like you, Drew, I walked out of there and I was like, like, that's not, I don't know, that's not what I was expecting. And I had, from a filmmaking standpoint, I don't know. I thought it was well directed, but
Yeah.
I didn't understand the story choices, character choices as in the context of Star Wars. And I thought it was maybe an entertaining movie, but not a good Star Wars movie. And
I agree with that.
so
It was competently made.
Yeah, it was competently made. I thought the actors did a fantastic job, looked great, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, as I was really disappointed from a story standpoint. Now, I went to Rotten Tomatoes after that and went to look at these reviews. And I was stunned because obviously I'm a filmmaker, I have like followed movies, studied movies for a long time. I have followed the pulse of the film going public for a long time through reviews and stuff like that. And usually I have a pretty good sense of like, even if I don't like something, I can tell that actually, I think this will do well. I think people like it, and vice versa. I feel like I have a decent gauge. This was like the first movie that I really felt like, am I this out of whack with everyone? Because I don't understand how these critics, I know this movie would have gotten nailed by so many critics for doing so many things that were blatantly not good writing wise, filmmaking wise and stuff. But apparently they all loved it, and so let me bring this up. So really, this was an article that came out on December 13th, 2017. This is just a few days after when the reviews were out, and it's talking about the 5 harshest Star Wars movie criticisms for The Last Jedi. And I want everyone to look at these quotes. An unoriginal, tone-deaf mess, a disappointment, unsatisfying, tamed, tamped down. It seems like it might never end. Okay.
It was entirely too long.
Right. Now this was an interesting article. It came out at the time. It seemed to come out in the face of this amazing tomato meter rating, right? And so I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I saw this article back in 2017, and I decided to go into Rotten Tomatoes to figure out, where are these negative reviews? Okay. So 3 of the reviews in this article, look, they're fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So we have a situation here, or at least at the time, when people were writing negative reviews, but they were counted as fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. And this started to infuriate me because I sensed that there was corruption here. Something was shady, and I didn't know what was going on, where critics were writing one thing and their reviews were completely misrepresented on Rotten Tomatoes. This was what made me lose faith in Rotten Tomatoes, Drew. Is that fair or unfair, do you think?
It's fair because, like, even if you read some of the notes here where it's like the Pete DeBruge one, it may sound like a backhanded compliment. With so much on the line, Johnson deserves credit for not messing things up. He didn't mess up. I guess that's a good bar. But what does the rest of that review say? Like, is the review saying like, hey, this really didn't make sense to me. It's really a 6 out of 10, but then it's a 97%. And it's like, that doesn't accurately reflect the tone of and I think it's just it shows this one in particular inherently shows the problem with Rotten Tomatoes, where you're taking a scale of something that should be on a scale and something that people should have nuance into, and you're boiling it into a binary yes or no. And I think that inherently is problematic. And you as a moviegoer and a filmmaker, you're looking at this saying, man, like this movie must be great. But then you start seeing the audience review, and then it's like, oh, this thing maybe isn't so great. But then you have the people that are saying, well, that's just fanboy Star Wars guys that hate the new stuff and
Right.
don't want to change. Like, it's more nuanced than that, personally, in my opinion. But those reviews are, I think, a good microcosm of what, or good example of what maybe the issue with this is. Certified fresh at 91%, but how positive are those reviews? Are they barely positive? Like, I don't know. This one has some staunch defenders too.
Right.
I think there's people that like refuse to say anything negative about this movie. Like, you can't, otherwise you hate, like, you hate whatever, whether you want to
Right.
say the new movie makers like Ryan Johnson, or you hate Daisy Ridley. And it's like, that's not the case. Like, you can respect what they did and still not enjoy the movie.
Right.
But if somebody likes this movie, good for them. Like, it's not for me, but okay. Like,
Right. Well, and that's the thing. That was my sense coming out of this movie, was
yeah,
that I could see, there were good parts, and I could totally see why some people would really like it.
sure.
But I expected it, we talked about like a 50% being mixed, where half the people said it was good, half the people didn't. I was really expecting much more of a mixed reaction from critics, just from
Mhm.
a filmmaking standpoint. It was kind of interesting to see. And of course, I could be wrong, but the problem was, see the audience score here?
Mhm.
They'll call that review bombing, but I went out and I personally, like, informally asked random people over the following weeks, like everyone from people in stores, waiters, like, what did they see The Last Jedi and what did they think? Like, people I knew and a lot of people I didn't
Mhm.
know. And they I would say that 4 out of 10, I probably talked to 25 people, and I would say maybe 4 out of 10, 3 out of 10 liked it, and the rest really didn't. And it was overwhelming, and I realized I'm not alone. And this was a very strange, and you could see it in the audience score.
Mhm.
It was just a very strange difference. It was odd, Drew.
There's a movie that, uh, I think actually might be a similar equivalent to this one, and I don't know if you would agree, because, I'm gonna throw this out there. I particularly do like this movie, but I understand why people don't like this movie, Man of
Okay.
Steel. And I think
Okay.
it's
Yes.
it's a it's a r to me, it's a very similar equivalent, because it's a story. Like, Superman is obviously it's a very storied character. It's got very much very specific history. There's some beloved, movies that are out there, like, people love, like myself included, the Christopher Reeve movies, right?
Mhm.
And then you have a controversial filmmaker, Zack Snyder, right, coming along, taking a different take on it. It was on the heels of the Dark Knight trilogy, so you had Christopher Nolan producing this thing. They said, "Hey, we wanna take this take on what if Superman was an alien, and what if he was, in
Right.
in the real world?" Like, whether you like this movie or not, whatever, but that got a mixed reception on Rotten Tomatoes. I think from both the audience score was higher, but the critics were sort of mixed on it. And I personally really like this movie for what it is. I think it's an underrated movie, but I also understand people that say, "Hey, I don't like that," because it's not the Christopher Reeve. It's not that style. Superman's supposed to be hopeful, and this is sort of dreary. And you
Right.
know, like, Last Jedi is similar in that regard, in that, like, but the critics was like 92% or whatever the heck that was. Like, I was shocked that Man of Steel was so controversial from a critic standpoint, because I thought from a film overall, like, it seemed like it's the kind of thing that critics would enjoy. It's a different take. It
Mhm.
was off of that. Uh, so that's why when I look at the one from Disney, it's like, man, were they doing something there? Like, I don't know. Maybe not. I'm not saying Warner wouldn't do the same, but I don't know. It's like Man of Steel is the reception of Man of Steel is the way that I would have expected the reception to The Last Jedi, whether you like it or not. And
Right.
it really does stand out to me that it's like 90% certified fresh and all these people like it. It's like, I don't know. I don't know.
Right. Right. And I think you can, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think that's a good example with Man of Steel. And you're right. I would have expected something similar.
Right.
And in hindsight, that critic score does seem perhaps not quite right for for The Last Jedi. As far as like how it's been received by everyone. And I guess we'll never know. But we're going to wrap up tonight, and maybe in the future we can keep talking about this if you guys are interested in. Thank you for watching this. I think Drew, I don't know, I'm interested to get your final takeaways. For me, I think it's that obviously you can't trust Rotten Tomatoes, but if you're interested and want to play the spectator sport, look at movies, especially Disney movies that are coming out, big tentpole movies that need to do well, and look at those verified audience reviews if they're high, and see, do they read like paid for scam Amazon reviews, or do they read like reviews from passionate moviegoers who are giving their opinions? And also be careful, find the critics that you connect with you personally, rather than relying on that tomato meter. I don't know, Drew, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, I think you summarized it perfectly. Like, I think you can't take it at face value. And we said it earlier in the show, but Rotten Tomatoes is really a tool that you can use to make decisions. And I think you have to know what you're getting into when you look at it. And I think you have to also approach it with a bit of skepticism to say, okay. So I think what you do is you have to look at it. You got to, like what you said, Ken, you got to find the critics or the people that have the same sort of taste that you do, or even the opposite, and sort of pick against it.
Mhm.
But I think you have to try to read a little bit more into it. I don't think you can use the score at face value, and I don't think that it's going to be a true reflector or indicator of a movie's particular quality. I think you have to approach these things with a bit of skepticism and use multiple sources of information to make your decisions, not just Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes can be helpful on the surface if you know how to use it, and I think it's just one of many inputs that I think you can use to make decisions to watch movies. So I'm still using it today, but I am using it probably differently than I did when it first launched. To what you said earlier, so I think. Yeah, I would love to talk about this more too. There's so much to say on this topic. I hopefully people
Yes.
want to hear more about it. We should do a part 2.
Well, we should do a part 2. And until that time, if you guys watch a movie and want some amazing breakdown of movies, check out the Last Row podcast. Drew is a co-host along with Badway, and they talk about all those movies that you forgot you loved. And then please, if you're so inspired, give them a 5-star review because they're great. And Drew, I want to thank you for coming on today. And I want to thank everyone for watching live. If you're watching on the replay or listening to the podcast, give us a review, give us a comment, go ahead and like and subscribe, and let us know what you would like to hear from us in the future. Thank you for joining us for this special examination of RottenTomatoes.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time on KenCast. Have a good night.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next time on KenCast.